GLM 5.2 costs $1 per million input tokens. Fable 5 costs $10, and on output tokens that gap stretches to 11 times, pulled straight from official pricing pages, no spin. Both of these models are live right now and teams are picking between them every single day, so I'm running Fable 5 versus GLM 5.2 across 5 real tests: languages, speed, fine-tuning, pricing, and safety. And every number is sourced with no vendor money involved. And honestly, the price gap is so wide, you'd expect GLM 5.2 to just sweep this thing. But there's one specific use case where Fable 5 is the only option on the table, and it could be the one that applies to your stack. Alright, so this comparison is for developers and teams deciding where to route their API calls. Pick the wrong model and you're either burning 10 times more budget than you need to, or you're shipping a product with 0 documented safety guardrails into a regulated industry, and both of those are real problems this comparison is built to help you avoid. Test 1, multi-language support and localization. Picture shipping a product in Spanish and your model just drops quality on translated outputs. Users churn, you don't know why, and by the time you figure it out, you've already burned weeks of debugging, which is way more common than people think. What I found here is kind of frustrating, honestly. Fable 5 has a built-in AI translator and polisher covering 10 languages, community reported, which is a real documented feature, but when I looked at GLM 5.2, there's just no published multilingual data at all. So on screen you're seeing Fable 5 with a number and GLM 5.2 with a blank. I was expecting at least some data on GLM 5.2's language coverage, and what I got is nothing to compare. So this one's a tie by default since you genuinely can't score it when one side hasn't published the numbers. Fable 5, 0, GLM 5.2, 0, 1 tied. Test 2, API response latency and throughput. Slow responses kill user experience fast, and if you're paying for a reasoning model that takes 93 seconds just to start outputting tokens, you need to know whether that wait is a bug or actually baked into how the model works. So here's what we got. GLM 5.2 clocks in at 115.2 tokens per second. Median output speed, Fable 5 runs at 73.1, and on time to first token, GLM 5.2 starts responding in 1.59 seconds, while Fable 5 takes 93 to 124 seconds. Though I want to flag right now that these come from completely different test setups, which you can see noted on screen. Now I want to be really honest before we call anything, because that 93-second TDFT for Fable 5 is spending that time actually thinking through the problem, and comparing their latency is kind of like timing a sprinter and a chess player on reaction speed. Honestly, I was ready to hand this to GLM 5.2 on raw numbers, but the test setups are so different, it wouldn't be fair since these models aren't built for the same job. So speed is another tie. That's Fable 5.0, GLM 5.20, 2 tests tied now. Test 3, fine-tuning and customization. So picture building a domain-specific app, say medical records or legal docs, and the base model keeps getting the terminology wrong, and you can't prompt engineer your way out of that forever, because at some point you need to actually adapt the weights. So if your model doesn't support that, you're just stuck. What surprised me here is how clean-cut this one is. GLM 5.2 is fully open weight under an MIT license, works with NVIDIA Nemo, MS Swift, and standard transformers and PEFD tools, while Fable 5 doesn't support fine-tuning at all, and what Fable 5 does have is 5 reasoning effort levels, which is genuinely clever, but it's not the same thing as owning the weights. I was expecting Fable 5's reasoning effort levels to at least make this close, and they're a cool feature, but they don't replace actual model ownership, so GLM 5.2 takes fine-tuning, no contest. Score is Fable 5.0, GLM 5.21, 2 tests still tied, and open weights under an MIT license is pretty hard to compete with. Test 4, pricing per token and total cost of ownership. Run 1 million output tokens through Fable 5 and you're paying $50 versus $4.40 for the same volume through GLM 5.2. And at production scale, that gap is a real budget line item, not rounding error. Looking at the official numbers side by side, Fable 5 is $10 per million input tokens and $50 per million output. GLM 5.2 is 1.40 input and 4.40 output, which works out to roughly 7 times cheaper on input and about 11 times cheaper on output. And while Fable 5 does have batch pricing at $5 input and cash hits at $1, those only apply in specific usage patterns. I knew GLM 5.2 would win on price, but I didn't expect the output gap to be that wide, because that's not a small discount, that's a completely different cost structure. GLM 5.2 takes pricing, clean win, and the score is now Fable 5.0. GLM 5.2 2 tests tied. Test 5, safety guardrails and content moderation. If you're deploying in healthcare or finance and your model surfaces harmful content or doesn't meet data retention requirements, you're looking at regulatory exposure. And that's the kind of failure mode that ends products. What I found here is pretty similar to the language test. Fable 5 has documented safety classifiers targeting offensive, cybersecurity, and biology content, routes sensitive requests to a more capable model, and has a mandatory 30-day data retention policy. But when I looked at GLM 5.2, there's just no public safety documentation at all. It's a complete black box on this one. Okay, so I genuinely expected GLM 5.2 to have at least some public safety posture, given how widely it's deployed, but there's nothing to verify. So safety is another tie for the same reason as languages. Final score, Fable 5.0, GLM 5.2. 3 tests tied, and Fable 5 clearly has the documented guardrails here, but you can't score a comparison when one side hasn't published anything. So here's where Fable 5 actually wins. Those 5 reasoning effort levels from off through max let you dial exactly how much thinking the model does and control your cost. Quality trade-off, the built-in AI translator and polisher covers 10 languages with no published GLM 5.2 equivalent and documented safety classifiers plus 30-day data retention make it the only real option for regulated industries. And here's where GLM 5.2 wins, and it wins pretty hard. 7 times cheaper on input, about 11 times cheaper on output at standard rates. Fully open weight under MIT so you can adapt it with Nemo, PEFT, and MS Swift, and raw output speed at 115.2 tokens per second versus Fable 5's 73.1, even accounting for different test setups. Honestly, I was expecting this to be closer, and what I got is a pretty clear split by use case. If you're in healthcare, finance, or any regulated space and you need documented safety guardrails and data retention, go with Fable 5 because there's no substitute there. But if you're running high-volume workloads and need to customize the model for your domain, GLM 5.2 is the obvious pick, and that output price gap is a number that's really hard to argue with.